I was one of the delegates who voted for the threat. I want to begin with that because most who tell this story tell it as witnesses, as bystanders, and I was not a bystander. I was one of the ones who raised my voice in the council chamber and said yes, threaten them, make Earth understand its place. I helped draft the words we sent. I was proud of them. And when humanity answered our long and terrible threat with just 2 words, those 2 words did a thing to me that I have spent the rest of my life trying to understand, because they did not frighten me, and they did not anger me, and they did not do any of the things a response to a threat is supposed to do. They saw me. They saw all of us, the whole threatening council, saw straight through us to the thing underneath, and named it, and forgave it. And there is no defense against being seen and forgiven by the people you have just tried to terrify. Let me tell you about the threat first, because you have to understand how mighty it was to understand how completely 2 words unmade it. I am Delegate Tovin of the V. Harney Ascendancy, and the V. Harney led the faction that threatened Earth. Humanity had been growing, not aggressively, not in any way that violated the Council's laws, but growing, spreading, becoming each year a little more significant in the affairs of the Reach, and the Council's old powers did not like it. I did not like it. There is a thing that happens in established powers when a young people rises, a tightening, a discomfort, and we called that discomfort by nobler names. We called it concern for stability, prudence, the responsible management of a changing galaxy. But underneath the names it was the old simple thing, the unease of those who hold power watching someone new approach the table. And so the V. Harney faction, with me among its loudest voices, resolved to put humanity in its place, to remind the upstarts that the Council was mighty and they were small, to issue a threat so total and so overwhelming that humanity would understand, once and for all, that they rose only at our sufferance and could be ended at our word. The threat we drafted was a masterwork of intimidation. I helped write it, and I will not pretend I was not proud of its weight. It catalogued the Council's strength, the fleets, the worlds, the ancient might of a dozen great powers acting in concert, and it laid that strength against humanity's smallness, and it made in cold and total language a single promise, that if humanity did not curtail its growth, did not accept the limits the Council would set, did not bend to the order of the established powers, then the Council would act, and the acting would be the end of human ambition and perhaps of humanity itself. It was a threat with no softness in it, no diplomatic cushioning, no face-saving exit. We wanted it to be terrible, wanted humanity to feel the full cold weight of the powers arrayed against them, wanted them frightened, because a frightened upstart is a compliant upstart, and compliance was what we sought. We delivered it in the great chamber, before the whole Council, with the full ceremony of the established powers pronouncing judgment on a lesser one. The human delegation was summoned to hear it. And I watched them as the threat was read, watched the small human delegation stand and receive the catalogue of their possible destruction, the promise of their ending, and I waited with the whole V. Harney faction for the response we expected, because there were only 2 responses a threat like ours could produce, and we were ready for both. The first possible response was defiance. The upstart, frightened but proud, refusing to bend, making bold declarations, promising resistance. We wanted defiance in a way because defiance justifies the threat. A people who answers a threat with defiance has confirmed they are the danger you said they were, and their defiance becomes the warrant for the action the threat promised. If humanity defied us, we would act, and the acting would be justified by their defiance, and the galaxy would see that the Council had given them a chance and they had refused it. The second possible response was submission. The upstart, frightened and wise, bending, accepting the limits, promising compliance. We wanted submission too, more than defiance really, because submission is the threat's true purpose. A people who submits to a threat has accepted their place below you, has confirmed your dominance, has become the compliant lesser power the threat was designed to produce. If humanity submitted, we would have one without acting, would have established our dominance at the cost of nothing, would have put the upstart permanently in its place. Defiance or submission. Those were the responses we were ready for, the two moves a threatened power can make, and either one gave us what we wanted, and we stood in the chamber certain that humanity would make one of them, because every threatened power in the history of the council had made one of them, because a threat is a fork with only two paths and the threatened must take one. Humanity took neither. The human delegate, a woman whose name I learned later was HFY, though in the moment she was only the human, the upstart, the one we had come to fright. The human delegate listened to our entire terrible threat in silence, the catalogue of human destruction, the cold promise of the end, all of it, and she did not look frightened, and she did not look defiant, and she did not look submissive, and the absence of all three expressions on her face was the first thing that unsettled me. Because I had read 1,000 faces receiving threats, and I had never seen one wear none of the three masks a threatened creature wears. She listened to all of it. And when it was done, when the full weight of the counsels might have been laid upon her, she was quiet for a moment, and then she spoke, and she said just 2 words. She said, "We understand." And the chamber waited for the rest of it, because 2 words cannot be a response to a threat that vast. 2 words must be the beginning of something, the opening of a defiance or a submission, and we waited for her to continue, to tell us what she understood, to make her 2 words into one of the responses we were ready for. And she did not continue. She had said the whole of her response. We understand. 2 words, and then silence, and the human delegation stood there having said the entirety of what they had come to say, and the great council, armed and ready for defiance or submission, found itself holding a response it had no preparation for at all. I did not understand it in the first moment. None of us did. We understand what? It seemed almost like submission at first, the beginning of an acceptance. We understand your threat, we understand our place. And the V. Harney faction began, in the first instant, to take it as submission, to feel the satisfaction of dominance established. But it was not submission. I knew it was not submission within a few breaths, because the human delegate's face was not the face of submission, was not the face of a creature accepting its place below another. It was something else, something I had no name for, something that looked, impossibly, almost like compassion. And a threatened creature does not look at the one who threatens it with compassion. That is not a thing that happens, and the wrongness of it began to spread through me like cold water. Because slowly, in the silence after those 2 words, I began to understand what they actually meant, what humanity understood, and it was not their place, and it was not our might, and it was not anything the threat had been about. What humanity understood, what those 2 words named, was us, the threateners. The thing underneath our threat. HFY had listened to our entire catalogue of might and menace, and she had understood, seen, all the way through. The thing the threat was actually made of, and the thing the threat was actually made of was not strength. It was fear. That was what those 2 words meant, and the meaning landed on me slowly, terribly, in the silence of the great chamber. We understand. We understand that you are afraid. We understand that this threat, for all its might and all its cold catalogued power, is not the act of a confident people, but of a frightened one. That the established powers do not threaten a rising people out of strength, but out of the deep unease of those who feel their position slipping. That the whole terrible apparatus of our threat was fear wearing the mask of dominance, the lashing out of powers who had watched humanity rise and grown afraid of what the rising meant for them. Humanity had listened to our threat, and instead of hearing the strength we had packed into it, they had heard the fear underneath it, and they had named that fear gently with 2 words in front of the whole council. We understand. And there is no defense against it. That is the thing I have spent my life understanding. A threat is a structure built to produce fear in the threatened, and it works. It can only work if the threatened party accepts the frame, accepts that they are the frightened one and the threatener is the strong one. Defiance accepts the frame. The defiant party is still the threatened one, still inside the dynamic, Fighting against a strength they have granted is real. Submission accepts the frame completely. But humanity had refused the frame entirely, had looked at the threat and seen, not strength to be feared or resisted, but fear to be understood. And in refusing the frame, in naming the threatener's fear instead of feeling their own, they had reversed the entire dynamic, had made the threateners the frightened ones and themselves the calm ones. And there is no counter to it, none, because the moment a threat is revealed to be fear in disguise, it stops being a threat and becomes a confession. And the threatener stands exposed in front of everyone as the frightened thing they actually are. I stood in the chamber, one of the delegates who had voted for the threat, who had been proud of its weight, and I felt the two words land on me and strip the strength from our mighty threat and reveal underneath it the thing I had not let myself see. That we had threatened humanity because we were afraid of them, that the whole catalog of our might had been the trembling of powers who felt the future slipping toward a people not us, and that humanity had seen it instantly and completely, and had answered our fear not with fear of their own, not with defiance, not with submission, but with the two most disarming words in any language, "We understand," which meant, beneath everything, "We see that you are afraid, and we are not going to pretend your fear is strength. And we are not going to be frightened by it, and we are not going to be cruel about it either, because a frightened people deserves understanding and not contempt, even when the frightened people is the one holding the threat." I will tell you what happened after, what the two words did to the council, to the V. Harney faction, to me, because they did a great deal and the doing of it is the rest of the story. But you have the heart of it now. The Galactic Council threatened Earth with all the might of the established powers, and humanity responded with just two words, and the two words were not defiance and were not submission, but something the Council had no defense against. They were understanding. They named the fear beneath our threat. And a threat that has been revealed in front of everyone to be fear wearing a mask is not a threat anymore. It is a mirror, and we, the mighty threateners, were left staring into it, at the frightened faces we had not known were our own. The V. Harney faction's first response to those two words was rage, and I want to tell you about the rage because the rage was the proof. If humanity had answered our threat with strength of their own, we would have met it with cold calculation, the assessment of a rival's power. If they had answered with submission, we would have felt satisfaction. But they answered with understanding, with the naming of our fear. And we answered the understanding with fury, and fury is the response of the exposed, not the powerful. A confident people does not rage when told it is afraid. It laughs because the claim is absurd. We did not laugh. We raged loudly immediately in the chamber and after it, and the loudness of our rage was the measure of how true the two words had been. Because you do not rage against a lie, you rage against a truth you cannot bear to have seen. We called it insolence. That was the first move, to reframe humanity's understanding as arrogance, as the upstart presuming to psychoanalyze its betters, as a kind of insult dressed in soft words. How dare they, the faction said. How dare they speak to the council as though they understood us, as though we were the ones to be understood, the ones with the hidden fear, the ones in need of their compassion. The insolence of it, the arrogance. And we worked ourselves into a great heat about the insolence, because the heat felt better than the alternative, because as long as we were furious about humanity's arrogance, we did not have to sit with the thing humanity had actually said, which was true, and which we knew was true, and which we could not afford to let ourselves know we knew. But you cannot rage forever, and rage burns down to ash, and in the ash you are left with the thing the rage was covering. And the thing the rage was covering, for me, in the long nights after the chamber, was the simple knowledge that humanity had been right. We had threatened them out of fear. I had voted for the threat out of fear. The fear I had dressed up as concern for stability, as prudence, as the responsible management of a changing galaxy. Ashav Vance had looked at all of that, at the whole noble apparatus of names I had built over my fear, and she had seen straight through it to the fear itself, and she had named it, and now that it was named I could not unsee it, could not put the noble names back over it, Because once someone shows you the fear under your own threat, you cannot unknow that it is there. I went to see the human delegation. I should not have. It was not sanctioned. The faction would have called it weakness. But I had to understand the thing that had unmade me. And so I went, alone, to where the human delegation was quartered, and I asked to speak with HFY. And to my surprise, she received me calmly, as though she had been expecting that one of us would come. And I asked her the question that had been burning in me since the chamber. I asked, "Why did you say that? Why understanding? You could have defied us, you had cause. You could have submitted, it would have been wise. Why did you choose the one response that humiliated us, that exposed us, that turned our own threat into a confession of our fear?" And HFY looked at me, with that same expression I had seen in the chamber. The one I had finally understood was compassion, and she said, "I didn't choose it to humiliate you. I want you to believe that because it's the most important part." I chose those words because they were true, and because they were the only response that could actually make us safe. She gestured for me to sit, and I sat, the threatener sitting at the feet of the threatened. Though it did not feel that way, it felt like something else, something I had no word for. "Think about what your threat actually was," she said. "You're an old power frightened of a young one. That's not shameful. It's the oldest story there is, the established fearing the rising. But frightened powers are dangerous, because fear makes you do terrible things to make the fear stop. Your threat was fear trying to make itself feel safe by making us small. And I had two real choices about how to respond, not defiance or submission. Those are fake choices. Those both keep the fear going. My two real choices were, make your fear worse or make it better." I did not understand, and she saw it, and she explained, and the explanation is the heart of the whole thing. "Defiance makes your fear worse," she said. "If we'd answered your threat with threats of our own, we'd have confirmed everything your fear was telling you, that we're dangerous, that the rising people means your end, that you were right to be afraid. Defiance feeds the fear, and a fed fear escalates. An escalation between a frightened old power and a rising young one is how galaxies burn. So defiance was off the table, not because we couldn't, but because it would have made the very thing your fear dreaded come true. And submission doesn't make your fear better either, it just postpones it, because a submitted people is a resentful people and the old power knows it, and so the fear doesn't go away, it just waits, knowing the submission is temporary, knowing the resentment is building. Submission is fear deferred, not fear healed. Neither fake choice makes anyone safer. They just keep the fear cycling between us until it finds its way to war." She paused. "So we chose the real response. We named your fear, gently, without contempt, and in naming it we did the one thing that actually makes a frightened power safer, which is to show them they don't need to be afraid. We understand means. We see that you're afraid and we're telling you that your fear is mistaken, that we are not the end of you, that a rising people does not have to mean a falling one, that there is room, that you are safe, that you do not need to threaten us because we were never the threat your fear told you we were." That's what those two words were. Not an insult, a reassurance. The only reassurance that could actually reach you, because it came from the people you were afraid of, which is the only place reassurance about a fear can ever come from. I sat with that for a long time, in the human quarters, and I understood that I had completely misread what had happened in the chamber. I had experienced the two words as humiliation, as exposure, as the upstart turning our threat against us, and they had been the opposite. They had been mercy. Humanity had been handed a threat, a fork leading to either escalation or domination, and they had refused both forks and offered instead the one thing that could actually end the fear underneath the threat, the reassurance from the feared party themselves that the fear was unfounded. We had come to make humanity afraid, and humanity had responded by trying to make us unafraid, because they had understood, better than we did, that our threat was our fear, and that the only way to make a threat stop is not to answer it but to heal the fear that produced it. "Why," I asked her, "why would you do that? We threatened you with your destruction. You owed us nothing, not understanding, not reassurance, not mercy. You could have made us pay for the threat in the chamber in front of everyone, exposed us, humiliated us, used our fear against us. Why did you choose to heal our fear instead of exploiting it? And HFY gave me the answer that I have carried ever since, the answer that is the difference between humanity and the powers that threaten them. She said, because we've been the frightened old power before, not against you, against ourselves in our own history again and again. We know what fear does to a people, how it makes you threaten and dominate and destroy, how it dresses itself up in noble names like stability and prudence, how it convinces you that the terrible things you do are strength when they're really just terror. We've been there. We've done the things fear makes you do to each other across our whole bloody history. And we learned slowly, at enormous cost, that you cannot make a frightened people safe by defeating them. You can only make them safe by reassuring them, by showing them the fear was mistaken, by offering understanding instead of the contempt or the counterthreat that fear is begging for. We didn't heal your fear because we're better than you. We healed it because we recognized it. It was our own fear looking back at us, wearing your faces. And you do not exploit your own fear when you see it in someone else. You forgive it. You reassure it. You say we understand because you do, because you've been exactly that afraid and you remember what it would have meant in that fear for someone to look at you with understanding instead of contempt. That is where part 2 ends, with the 2 words revealed as mercy rather than humiliation, with the understanding that humanity had answered a threat not with defiance or submission, but with the reassurance that heals the fear beneath all threats, and that they had done it because they recognized in the council's fear their own. In part 3, I will tell you what I did with this understanding, and what the V. faction did, and how the threat finally ended, not in war and not in domination, but in the strangest way a confrontation between powers has ever ended. And the last thing HFY taught me in those quarters about why the strongest response to a threat is the one that refuses to be threatened and chooses, instead, to understand. I went back to the V. faction, and I tried to tell them what I had understood, and I failed. And the failing taught me the last hard thing about fear, which is that you cannot reason a frightened people out of their fear from the inside, because the fear has captured the reasoning, and a captured reasoning defends the fear instead of examining it. I stood before the faction I had been a loud voice in, and I told them, the humans are right, we threatened them out of fear, and they answered not with a counterthreat but with reassurance, and the wise thing, the only thing that makes us safer, is to accept the reassurance, to set down the fear, to let the 2 words do what they were meant to do, which is to end the cycle before it becomes a war. And the faction looked at me the way a frightened crowd looks at the one who tells them their fear is unfounded, not with relief, but with suspicion, because a frightened people does not want to hear that its fear is mistaken. It wants to hear that its fear is justified and that something can be done to make the fear stop, and I was offering neither. They turned on me a little, called me compromised, said the humans had gotten to me, that my visit to their quarters had been a weakness, and now I was carrying their poison back to the faction. And I understood, standing there accused, the full depth of what HFY had told me, that a frightened power cannot be reasoned out of its fear, can only be reassured by the very thing it fears, and that even the reassurance takes time because the fear resists it, because the fear would rather be justified than soothed. The faction was not ready to set down the threat. The fear had too deep a hold. And for a season it seemed the 2 words had failed, that humanity's mercy had been wasted on a people too frightened to accept it, that the V. would press the threat anyway, would escalate, would make their fear come true by acting on it. But here is the thing about reassurance, the thing that is the heart of how this ended. It works slowly, but it works because it is true, and the truth has a patience that fear does not. Humanity did not withdraw the 2 words when we failed to accept them. They did not take our rage and our suspicion as an excuse to abandon the reassurance and meet us with the counterthreat our fear was begging for. They simply kept being unthreatening. kept being the thing their two words had promised. A rising people that did not menace the established ones, that left room, that demonstrated, day after day, in every interaction, that the fear underneath our threat had been mistaken. They let the two words be proven true by time. And slowly across that season, as humanity kept failing to be the threat our fear had insisted they were, the fear in the V-Harney faction began, against its own will, to ease. Because you cannot stay afraid forever of a thing that keeps, patiently, gently, refusing to be frightening. That was humanity's deepest move, the one I did not understand until I watched it work. The two words in the chamber had not been the whole of the response, they had been the announcement of it. We understand. And then humanity had spent the season that followed making those two words true, proving by their conduct that they had meant it, that they really did understand our fear and really were not the threat it told us they were, until the proof accumulated past the point where even a frightened old power could keep its fear alive. The reassurance was not a sentence. It was a sentence followed by a season of living up to the sentence, and the living up to it was what finally reached us, because words can be doubted, but a season of consistent gentleness from the people you were afraid of cannot, in the end, be doubted forever. The threat died. Not in a dramatic reversal, not in a grand council vote, but quietly, the way a fire dies when you stop feeding it. The V-Harney faction's fear easing degree by degree as humanity declined, day after day, to justify it. Until one ordinary cycle the faction simply did not bring the threat forward again, did not renew it, let it lapse, because the fear that had powered it had finally been reassured into silence by a rising people who had chosen, against every provocation, to keep being safe to live beside. The threat that had been a masterwork of intimidation ended not with a bang or a surrender but with a frightened people slowly, almost without noticing, ceasing to be afraid. I changed in that season. I had voted for the threat. I had been a loud voice in the faction. I had been, I understood now, one of the most frightened because the loudest threateners are always the most afraid. And watching humanity heal our fear with patience and reassurance, instead of exploiting it, with counter-threat taught me the thing I had needed my whole life to learn, the thing the two words had carried into the chamber, and that the season had proven true. That a threat is always fear, that fear is healed by reassurance and not by victory, and that the strongest response to a threat is not to answer its force, but to address its fear, to refuse the fork of defiance or submission, to refuse to be threatened at all, and to offer instead the understanding that the frightened threatener most needs and least expects. I saw HFY a final time, when the threat had died and humanity's place in the Reach was secure, not because they had defeated the Council, but because they had reassured it, which is a more durable security than any victory, because a defeated power waits for revenge while a reassured power simply stops being afraid. And I thanked her, the threatener thanking the threatened, which should have been strange and was not, and I asked her the last question, the one that completes this story. I asked, were you not afraid in the chamber? We threatened you with your destruction with all the might of the Council. How did you stand there and feel no fear, only understanding? How did you answer our terror with calm? And HFY smiled, and she said the thing that is the true end of this, the thing I have carried longest. She said, "Oh, I was afraid. Don't mistake the calm for fearlessness. I was terrified, standing there, hearing you promise to end my whole people. But I'd learned a thing a long time ago that let me set my fear aside long enough to see yours. I'd learned that when someone threatens you, the most important question is not, how do I survive this threat, but why is this person threatening me? And the answer almost always is that they're afraid. And once you see the other person's fear, your own gets quieter, because you understand that you're not facing a monster, you're facing someone as frightened as you are, who's just hiding it better behind their strength. Two frightened peoples, each terrified of the other, each hiding it behind a mask. Yours a mask of dominance, mine a mask of calm. And someone has to be the first to take the mask off. Someone has to be the first to say, I see that you're afraid, and I'm not going to pretend I'm not, and I'm not going to use your fear against you because I know exactly what it feels like. That's all the two words were, the taking off of the mask, the first move toward each other instead of against. Someone has to make it. We decided, a long time ago, that we'd rather be the ones who make it than the ones who wait for it. Because waiting for the other side to lower their weapon first is how everyone stays armed forever, and somebody, eventually, has to be brave enough to be understood, and to understand first. I have thought about that for the rest of my life. Somebody has to be brave enough to understand first. The Galactic Council threatened Earth with all its might, and humanity responded with two words, and the two words were the bravest thing I have ever seen, because they were the taking off of the mask in a room full of armed and frightened powers, the choosing to understand a fear instead of answering it, the first move toward instead of against. We had thought the brave thing, the strong thing, was the threat, the catalog of might, the promise of destruction. And humanity showed us that the threat was the frightened thing, the weak thing, the mask, and that the truly strong thing, the truly brave thing, was the two soft words that refused the whole armored game and reached instead for the frightened creature underneath the armor, ours and theirs alike. The Galactic Council threatened Earth. Humanity responded with just two words, we understand. And those two words ended a threat that all the might of the established powers could only have escalated, because they did the one thing might can never do, which is to heal the fear that makes the might necessary. And a galaxy where the powerful have learned to say, we understand, to one another's fear instead of submit or be destroyed, is a galaxy that humanity made a little safer with two words, spoken calmly, by a frightened woman brave enough to see, and name and forgive. The fear in the people who had come to make her afraid. That is the strongest thing I ever saw. Not a fleet, not a weapon. Two words that took the mask off fear, and showed a whole council of armed and frightened powers that the bravest move in the universe is to understand first.